There's a really excellent piece in the American Thinker by Oleg Atbashian. I don't know who he is beyond this article, beyond his title in this article, but quite an intelligent person. And he says, as he goes into this article further down, I'm familiar with Russian propaganda well enough to recognize a scripted narrative. Some conservative hosts may not praise Putin's ideas directly, but they favor guests and authors who deliver the influence operation script, blaming the victims and diminishing their suffering. This looks just as bad as pointing a camera at the scene of a violent rape while mocking the victim screaming, making fun of her clothes, saying that she deserves it, and suggesting that she stop faking pain and enjoy the inevitable. With the media presenting such irreconcilable viewpoints, American consumers of news have split into two warring factions, but the accusations and arguments with which they hit each other over the head are false on either side. And then he goes on to explain. Russian influence operation or active measures have been targeting the U.S. for decades, aiming to demoralize Americans and make them hate one another. Judging by the state of affairs today, Russian operations have been quite effective. The KGB was dissolved in the early 90s, followed by a short respite. Then Putin, a former KGB colonel, restarted the influence game and enhanced it with digital gadgets. This time, in addition to the traditional leftist radicals, he started targeting conservatives as potential agents of influence. Again, this from the American Thinker. Russian propaganda is deeply embedded and is sophisticated enough to appear as honest opinions of concerned citizens. But what often betrays it is the narcissistic desire of making everything about Russia. Whether they're fuming over Russian election interference or over Russia setting up fake BLM pages on Facebook, or being dragged into sympathizing with Russia over its bogus fears of NATO expansion, its so-called national interests, its religiosity and spirituality, another phony, and so on. The Soviet days of communist propaganda, any American influencer could get away with it by claiming it was simply a selfless Marxist. But today, when Russia's ideology is chauvinistic nationalism, it's a bit odd for regular Americans to be simply a selfless defender of Russia's national interests. While Russia's defenders point out the existence of Ukrainian nationalism, they somehow neglect to mention the unhinged Russian nationalism. The two are not equal. The nationalism of a dominant ethnicity in an empire that aims to subjugate other ethnicities as inferior to the main one is called chauvinism or supremacism. The nationalism of a smaller ethnicity trying to free its neck from under its big brother's boot is called a movement for dignity, freedom, and independence, something American conservatives have always identified with. Contrary to what a section of conservative media claims, Putin is not a Christian knight in shining armor fighting the New World Order. He has his own New World Order in mind, which is spiritually closer to Mordor. And look at Russian society today, with its brutal suppression of dissent, government corruption, and state-sponsored brainwashing. Should give an idea of what he has in store for the rest of the conquered world. Russia may have different faces at different times, but the one we're staring at today, obsessed with the cult of Putin and conspiracy theories, is not Lara from Dr. Zhivago, who never existed, but a manipulative drama queen dragging others into his alcohol-fueled problems and then using the suckers as tools to achieve its soulless goals. America shouldn't be codependent in this abusive behavior. Top-level Russian propagandists once bragged that if his agency's methods of psychological manipulation were open and legal, they could easily get a Nobel for inventing it. If I were to guess, he says, at least one of those methods relies in part on the drama triangle principle. The drama triangle was first described by Stephen Karpman in the 1960s. It's a model of dysfunctional social interactions and illustrates a power game that involves three roles: victim, rescuer, and persecutor. Each role represents a common and ineffective response to conflict. And he explains that further. Internally on state-owned TV channels, Russia propaganda instills a sense of superiority, entitlement, and indignation, similar to what an abusive ex-husband feels towards his runaway ex-wife, who had better love him or else. In this case, the runaway ex-wife is from Ukraine. In the messaging designed for Western countries, however, Russia plays the manipulative, poor is me victim. It blames largely imaginary villains and conspiracies for its misfortunes and appeals to the kind, well-meaning, but somewhat gullible people of the world who believe the victim and come to the rescue at the cost of sacrificing their own interests. Playing the role of noble hero while forgetting about their own problems makes these rescuers feel good about themselves for a brief time. And he goes on, those Americans who disagree with the rescuers about Russia's victimhood are automatically categorized as persecutors, agents of the deep state or the New World Order. I've been called that on Facebook a few times, he says. Thanks a lot, Russia. When did this begin? It could already have been in place when the American left opposed the U.S. entering the war in Europe during the Hitler-Stalin Friendship Pact. But the moment Hitler attacked the USSR, they instantly adopted a pro-war help Russia stance. Americans used to be split over Russia and its exploits throughout the entire Cold War, including Vietnam. Even Obama's mother, a communist nonconformist, met his Kenyan father in a Russian class. She wanted to stick it to the man, and she did. In those days, the liberals were the rescuers and the conservatives were the persecutors. In today's game, those roles have switched. But Russia's never stopped being the poor is me victim with a mysterious soul. The switch happened during the 2016 presidential elections when Hillary Clinton accused Donald Trump of colluding with Russia. Before long, Americans became split over the Russian collusion conspiracy theory. All we could hear from the media throughout Donald Trump's presidency was Russia, Russia, Russia. And in the eyes of the media, Republicans became the lovers of Russia and Putin. The myth of that unnatural love is still alive today among Democrats. Today, Russia, Russia, Russia continues in the form of debates over the recognition of Russia's geopolitical interests, quote unquote, in former Soviet lands. The emotional details of injustice to Russia multiply daily. And we keep arguing about them without stopping to think that maybe most of those details are being made up by Russia just for this very purpose. And he goes on. And this is what I mean by the Putin wing of the Republican Party in the media and in the Democrat Party versus those naive saps who are of the cold pink, the code pink time type, pacifists, isolationists. And I don't see how you can be an American firster either way. And by the way, the alternative isn't sort of the Graham, McCain, interventionist, wherever you see it, wherever you smell it, wherever you know it. Nobody's arguing that these days, nobody who's serious. But when you see what's going on in Ukraine, and you know why it's going on in Ukraine, and you have to hear the propaganda from the Putin wing, not just the insanity of the pacifists, but the propaganda of the Putin wing, this is why I push back. This is why I call them out. Eastern Europe understands this. They've been under the man's boot. That is the Soviet Union. Israel understands this. Its population includes Holocaust survivors and men and women who fought in 1967 in the Yom Kippur War, and their backs are against the Mediterranean. Taiwan understands this, with a nation of 1.4 billion facing it down. Unfortunately, a lot of people in our country do not. I'll be right back.